Now we get to the really fun part of flying, and that's the cross country. An important tool for planning your cross-country flights is a flight computer. But don't be buffaloed by the flight computer, because I'm going to show you how absolutely easy and simple it is to use. There are two sides to the flight computer, the circular slide rule side on the front and the wind side with the clear plastic disc. And with the flight computer, you'll be able to figure out things like your time en route, your fuel, your distance, and what the wind is doing to you. Now, you could also do all of this with a piece of paper and a pencil or with an electronic calculator, but the flight computer can be operated with one hand, and since it doesn't have any, it never runs out of batteries. And I'm going to show you how much easier it is to let your flight computer do the work. Let's take a look at the circular slide rule side of this computer first and see how easy it is to use it to multiply and divide. Turn the flight computer so that the 10 on the outer scale is up towards the top. Notice, over here it says distance. The miles are always going to be on the outer scale of the flight computer. Rotate the inner dial so the 10 on the inner scale is next to the 10 on the outer scale. All that's doing is giving us a nice handy starting point so we know where the numbers are. Now, 10 on the outer scale can be miles, and as we're going to be talking about later, it can also be your fuel. Distance or fuel are always going to be on the outer scale. There are two inner scales that represent time. The first inner scale is for minutes, and the next inner scale is labeled hours. Take a look back at the tens, where we have the 10 on the top of the 10. One of the things you'll notice as you look around the scales here, you don't have a 1 on the flight computer. You have to use the tens to represent a lot of different things. That 10 on the outer scale could stand for 10, but it could also stand for 1 or 100 or 1,000. It just depends on what scale of problem you're working. The 10 on the inner scale could be for 10 minutes, but it could also be for 1 minute, or it could be 100 minutes. How many zeros you have after the 10, or if you have any zeros at all, depends on the kind of problem that you're working. That's where common sense will come into play as we work through the exercises. Take a look around on the outer scale of the flight computer to the right. What we're doing is looking for a 2 on the flight computer, but you won't find a 2. What you do find is a 20. And the 20 on the outer scale of the computer could stand for 20 miles. But it could stand for 2 miles, 200 miles. It could also be 2,000 miles. Again, it depends on the kind of problem that you're going to be working. What you use the front side of this computer for, basically, is to multiply or divide. To multiply or divide, you set a ratio in the flight computer. Take a look back, where the 10 is on top of the 10. Now, here's a question for you. If you travel 1 mile in 1 minute, how fast are you traveling? What you need to do is set a ratio up on the flight computer. You've got 10 on the outer scale, in this case representing 1 mile, and the 10 on the inner scale representing 1 minute. Now you've got 1 mile on the outer scale next to 1 minute on the inner scale, and you've got a ratio there, a 1-to-1 ratio. Just off the top of your head, just thinking about it without even looking any further on the flight computer, if it took you 1 minute to travel 1 mile, if you're covering 1 mile every minute, how fast are you going? You're doing 60 miles in 60 minutes, or 60 knots. To verify that, look around on the inner scale of the flight computer until you find 60 minutes. When you find the 60 minutes, there will also be a nice black arrow to help it stand out. When you find the 60 minutes on the inner scale, across on the outer scale of the flight computer, you'll find how many miles you're going to cover in that 60 minutes. And as you can see, it is 60 miles, and that is 60 knots. What you've done is you've set up a ratio in the flight computer. Now let's say you travel 1 mile, but instead of doing it in 1 minute, it takes you 2 minutes instead. How fast are you traveling? In this case, we still use the 10 on the outer scale to represent the 1 mile that we traveled. But now we need to put the 20 on the inner scale underneath it to represent 2 minutes. Move the inner scale around until the 20 on the inner scale, representing 2 minutes, is lined up under the 10 on the outer scale, which represents 1 mile. What we're doing is we are setting up the ratio, and in this case we traveled 1 mile in 2 minutes. Just off the top of your head again, if you traveled 1 mile but it took you 2 minutes, how fast are you traveling? You're doing 30 knots because you're traveling half as fast as you were before. But let's confirm that by looking around the flight computer. Move the whole flight computer around, looking for 60 minutes on the inner scale. When you find the 60 minutes on the inner scale, the outer scale will tell you how many miles you're going to cover in that 60 minutes. And sure enough, you're going to cover 30 miles in that 60 minutes, or 30 knots. The ratio that you've got set up here is a 1-to-2 ratio. 1 mile in 2 minutes is the same as 30 miles in 60 minutes. It's a 1-to-2 ratio, and that ratio holds all the way around the flight computer. That would apply whether it was 1 mile in 2 minutes, 10 miles in 20 minutes, or 100 miles in 200 minutes. That same ratio would apply all the way around. So all we're going to do on the front is set up ratios, and by doing so, you'll see in the upcoming lessons how simple it really is to use your flight computer to help you solve problems. Now, one last thing to look at on the front is the temperature conversion at the bottom. You can use this scale to convert between Fahrenheit and Celsius. If you look at 80 degrees Fahrenheit on the bottom, just above it you can see that 80 degrees Fahrenheit converts to 27 degrees Celsius.